that is your chance. Going once, going twice. Last call for comments for items not on the agenda. All right, I don't see any requests. So with that, let's go forward straight to the agenda. Item number 1, and that is the meeting minutes from the last meeting, which was on April 28th. Any comments or feedback on the minutes? I see heads shaking. I'll take that as a no. Very well. Can someone?
I move that we approve the minutes from the Complete Streets Commission from April 28th, 2021, as is.
Do I have a second?
I second it.
Great, all in favor? Let's go round table. Commissioner, okay, I see hands going up. I'll take that. If I can see everybody's hands up, please, I'll take that as a yes. Okay, Steve, I don't see your hand. That's okay, perfect. So we have a unanimous 7 votes in favor. Great. So with that, we move to item number 2, and that is Complete Streets Master Plan Project Update. And Jaime, let's just hit the highlights. I guess Jeff, I see Jeff. So I don't think Jeff. Yeah, he's signed on. So I presume that Jeff's going to take over, right?
That's correct. Yeah, I'm just going to do a really quick introduction for Jeff, then I'll hand it over to him. So tonight's agenda is really focused on the review of the draft proposed bicycle network and the proposed bicycle pedestrian network. And so when we ultimately develop our brand new bicycle and pedestrian transportation plan as a merged document from the historical documents in 2012 and 2015, you know, a couple of the important items that have come out of that are our future proposed networks for bikes and peds, and also our proposed projects list that we prioritize based off of the criteria that the commission helped develop back in March. And so tonight's agenda is really focused on the review of the proposed network. It is a first cut draft. Our task force just saw this for the first time yesterday. And so we're going to ask those commissioners, those task force members, and we're actually going to ask the commissioners tonight, if you haven't had a chance to fully review those network maps, give us the feedback that you can. We're going to ask you guys to just put your thoughts together and send them to me as an email before June 9th. And that way also can combine all of the comments from the task force, any comments that we receive from you tonight or over the next couple of weeks. And then Jeff can merge those documents to help develop the priority project list that you will be seeing in June. And so with that, I'm going to hand things over to Jeff and let you guys get going.
Before we start, I know that the hour of the day is such that it conflicts with dinner. So any commissioner who wishes to turn the camera off and enjoy a peaceful meal, I would not object to that.
Or watch me eat my peanut butter sandwich.
At least you're eating. I'm not eating anything.
Screen 1.
Jeff, all yours.
All right. Thanks, commissioners. Thank you, Chair. Jeff Knowles, good to be with you again. Got a lot to go through. You've got a packed agenda, so I want to dive right in and reserve as much time to get your feedback as possible. So this is really the big event. We've got a draft set of recommendations for the bicycle and pedestrian network for you to review. So I'm going to walk through those in an overview fashion, and then hopefully reserve time for you to provide some initial comments. Let's just start by saying we're not going to get them all in tonight, and I think we have until June 9th to collect your feedback. So if you get that through Jaime, we will use that and sort through all the comments in our next set of revisions. As just a reminder, this is one of our 4 main elements of the Complete Streets Master Plan. It's the merge and the update of the 2012 and 2015 bike and ped plans. So our second deliverable is what we're presenting to you tonight, the proposed improvements and project list. Where we're going will be next month, the study session on project prioritization. And then we'll have a draft plan in August for City Council, and the public draft final plan later this summer, early fall. So the bicycle network is broken into the 4 different classifications set forth by Caltrans. And so those are shared use paths, class 1, dedicated space for bikes and peds that are shared but separated from motor vehicles by at least 5 feet and usually a raised separation. Bike lanes, I think everybody understands what those are. There's a second alteration that's a buffered bicycle lane, just paint on the ground separating the bicycle lane from moving traffic. Bike routes are meant to be shared with motor vehicles on low volume, low speed streets. And then class 4 is something that's new since the last bicycle plan. These are separated bikeways. They're also called cycle tracks, and in some areas of the country, they're called protected bikeways or bike lanes. These are for the exclusive use of bicyclists, and they're very similar to a buffered bicycle lane, but deviate in one key area, that the buffer is a physical separation that could take many different forms. They could be bollards, they could be parked cars, they could be curb stops, they could be raised curbs or planted vegetation. There's a lot of different ways that these could look and feel that make them context appropriate for Los Altos. I want to mention that our inspiration for the recommendations that I'm unveiling tonight really take from the 2012 plan, what was proposed, what has been built, and what has not been built in the last 8 or 9 years. They also are inspired by a look at safety information since the last plan and public input that we received through the public input map, through the task force, through the CSC, and through public meetings through the concept plan line drawings, which helped me inform kind of what works and maybe doesn't work for Los Altos. One of the big things that I noted in my review of the last previously proposed plan and what's been built are the bike boulevards, the bike routes, and some of the class 1 shared use paths that have not been implemented. And so I looked at those hard and said, is there something else that we could do? And so you'll see in a minute, I'm going to get into this, about probably one of the biggest deviations is the class 1 that's proposed on Fremont is turning into something else, class 4 in this next iteration. So we're looking for good feedback there. So I just want to orient you to the map and the legend. Anything that is solid is existing and will stay existing with no additional upgrades planned in this draft. Anything that you see as dashed was previously proposed, and it's something that we are going to continue, and we will propose it again. And then the recommendations are things that may have been previously proposed, and we're either tweaking it, or we're carrying it forward, or it's new from whole cloth. We've got an inset for the downtown as well. And I just want to walk through a little bit. The class 1 shared use paths are recommended on Carmel Terrace, which is really completing a gap in the existing sidewalk network to get people up to Block Intermediate. Miramonte Ave, which is a carryover from the last plan, and there's funding set aside in the CIP for this. And then a small portion of San Antonio Road. This is brand new. This is something that responds to a lot of comments we heard about San Antonio Road. There isn't enough room to do anything with the bike lanes. You can't get any more space without stripping out the entire median that runs down San Antonio to even create a buffered bike lane or make them wider. So we've got a proposal that would include converting the pedestrian sidewalk space on the east side of San Antonio Road for a small segment from downtown to Almond, pretty much from Edith to Almond, to create that important connection from the downtown up to Los Altos High School. So looking for some feedback on that. This is an example of kind of what we're talking about here. The dimensions just barely work, but as was noted in the task force meeting, it does get really tight. And so we'd have to look very closely at the right-of-way implications here, but I think it will fit. Class 2 bike lane recommendations. I'm not going to go through all of these here. They're in the map and in the packet that you received. But a lot of this involves narrowing down travel lanes. Like here's an example on Oak Avenue. It's a very wide travel lane. There already are edge lines, but no formalized bicycle lanes. And so this would be an opportunity to formalize those. We have some opportunities for buffered bicycle lanes. You can see that some of these are converting class 2's regular bike lanes to adding in the buffer where there's space allowed. And then 2 of these areas are where there's nothing proposed. So an example could be on Campbell, where we think there's enough room to add in bike lanes. And then there's a lot of bicycle routes. And again, these are really dedicated to, hopefully we've picked out the low volume, low speed streets These are residential streets, and these are the neighborhood routes to get through and past busy arterials where people don't feel comfortable bicycling. So we're looking for feedback there if these make sense. And one thing that I'll point out is that these could be as simple as pavement markings and signs, or more complicated to involve traffic calming. A lesson that we've learned through going through, and this is what we talked about at our last Complete Streets Commission study session, was the pushback we received about converting some of these proposed bike routes to what I'd call a bike boulevard, which would involve traffic calming treatments. I think we need to be really careful and reserve some of those traffic calming treatments to where there is a issue, a safety issue, a speeding issue that's been documented that's preventing people from bicycling and feeling comfortable mixing with traffic on these routes. If that's the case, I think we need to go back and maybe propose some of those traffic calming elements. That's not done here yet, and that's something that will be looked at, I think, in the further phases of design. So these are quite a number of those Class 3 routes that wind through Los Altos. Finally, Class 4 separated bikeway recommendations. You can see here, some of these are Class 2s that we think we can convert and create more space to create that physical barrier in the buffer space. Almonte Avenue, Almond Avenue, which is in a completion and extension of what's going to be built in front of Los Altos High School. El Camino Real, which you saw on the concept plan lines that we reviewed. Fremont Avenue, which is a conversion of what was previously proposed to Class 4. And then Grant Road, which you also saw and provided feedback on the concept plan line. The feedback that I heard loud and clear was pick a side, make sure it's uniform. So the idea of liking a Class 4 was supported, but just making sure that the design treatment was a little more coherent. And then finally, St. Joseph Avenue, which is also a concept plan line that would take from Foothill Expressway down to Stonehaven. So this is an example on Fremont Avenue. We believe that there's enough space to create Class 4s by borrowing some from the unimproved natural space next to the bike lane. The travel lanes could also be narrowed just a little bit to create some additional space. Right now, as it's planned, as it's previously proposed, would be to take one side of the street and convert it to a Class 1, which would maybe require significant tree removal. I think that you can do a Class 4 on both sides of the street on Fremont and probably not take out the majority of the trees. And so that's something that's being proposed here in this draft. Some of the comments that I want to walk through from the task force meeting last afternoon, on the major corridors to revisit Los Altos Avenue as a north-south spine to downtown. This would be so that we can't really focus a whole lot on San Antonio Road. What else can we do on a parallel major corridor? Make clear that the recommendations for Foothill Expressway, that what we proposed are clear, and that it's, even though it's not a city jurisdiction, the city should ask the county to deviate from its policy and install a Class 2, 2B, or even a Class 4. Some members of the task force liked the idea of Class 1 for a short piece of San Antonio, but another did not like mixing the pedestrians and the bicyclists. And I'll mention on that proposal, the bike lane on the southbound side of San Antonio would remain for bicyclists separated from pedestrians. And so this one on the east side, the northbound side, would be mixed for that small portion. There was a concern about repurposing natural areas next to Fremont Avenue for roadway for Class 4, and also a concern about revisiting Covington Road, which does not have bike lanes and is not proposed to have bike lanes. And there was a concern that we should revisit that and look harder at that. Neighborhood connections, is the downtown to Mountain View to Los Altos connection legible? Consider strengthening via Camellia. Looked a lot at Hawthorne as a bike priority connection to downtown. Right now it's a class route, and the comment was to really to look at that and see if we could do something else to really emphasize that connection. Same with Truman. Could this serve as a bike priority to Mountain View High School? This would require parking removal on one side of the street. And there was good, healthy discussion about what we think residents and decision makers, council, would agree to in terms of parking removal to fit in bike lanes on residential streets. And there was one map error or legibility. The neighborhood connector was missing from Stardust Lane to Riviera Drive. Thank you, Commissioner Ambiel, for that. And so those were not all, but I'm trying to synthesize quite a bit of the comments that we received from the task force about the bike network. I also will mention that these maps are not perfect, and we expect to learn about some of the ways we can improve. And so that concludes the bicycle network presentation. I want to pause and then turn over to the pedestrian network, and then I will open up for questions and for your comments. Excuse me.
All right, let's actually take clarification questions. Let's keep them brief, please. If you have any on this particular topic for Jeff. Commissioner Ambiel, go ahead, please.
2 questions. One, was anything removed from the prior bike network to today? Was anything dropped or eliminated from 12 to now?
The answer is yes, but it would be mostly, let's see.
And I know this is
I
a
don't, you know,
okay.
I actually take that back. I think there might just be some changes in the way that we recommended, Commissioner Ambiel, but maybe not dropped. The one thing that I'm thinking about, yeah, it's just changes of recommendation. So I'm looking kind of in around the Montclair Elementary, where there's like a bicycle lane proposed on, I think it's Eva, and that's just remaining a bike route on this one. And then changes from the class 1s that I mentioned. I don't think anything was eliminated from 2012 to today.
So it might have been upgraded but not removed.
Upgraded or downgraded. but not
Okay,
removed.
upgraded, up or downgraded. Okay, thank you. My next question is, I was looking for the detailed packet and I was unable to find that. So if you can send that link to me again so that I can go into detail on each one of these, especially the PED plan, I'd really appreciate it. Those are my only 2 questions.
Okay, I think that's Jaime to follow up on that.
Yeah, I'll put the, I'll go ahead and put the web link to the Complete Streets Commission agenda packet online. All of the links and documents should be available online on your commission agenda. I'll put that in the chat.
I was able to find all the commission agenda attachments. I just question, where's the detail on each individual segment? You seem to infer that there was a detailed document that described things, and I couldn't find that.
There was no attachment that
Okay.
provided a more detailed discussion on the individual.
Okay,
I should take that back, Jeff. I think you're talking about, she's talking about, I think, your spreadsheets that we did not
Yes.
include in the agenda packet.
correct.
Got
Correct.
it. Yeah, we can definitely look at those a little later. We didn't put them in the agenda packet because we felt it was actually really hard to follow. It was easier to just review the map. And so if you want
Okay.
to see that, I can definitely forward it to the commission.
Thank you.
Commissioner Katz, go ahead.
Yeah, I just have 2 questions and they're related, Jeff. And when you looked at the 2012 plan, which was 8 or 9 years ago, how much of that was actually completed percentage-wise versus what was envisioned, roughly?
Not a lot has changed, but the 2012 plan, the majority of the recommendations were bike routes, and not many of the bike routes were formalized between 2012 and today. And so that's the biggest change there. The more difficult ones, the more costly items were the class 1 on Miramonte, the class 1 on Fremont. Those have not been made. And so that one was really, I think, for me to look at and say, okay, why has that not gone through? And is it a cost issue? Is it a staff resources issue? Is it there's some other factor there? And so that's what I looked at closely to figure out, okay, is there a new recommendation that could be easier to implement and still get the benefits that the previous plans were seeking?
Okay, and then my second question has to do with the further development of this plan, which I think is a really good start, which is when you come back with your recommendation, will there also be some detail on feasibility over time based on the amount of resources, both financial and human resources required to complete them in terms of what it will take to get the priority ones done in a kind of a reasonable time frame?
The next time that we meet, I will be revising these recommendations based off of task force and CSC comments, and then running the prioritization based on the methodology that you've provided and reviewed. And that will help city staff understand where to work, what's the highest priority, middle priority, low priority. And we will also be, as part of our scope, coming up with cost estimates for each of the individual projects. So that will help the city staff go out and find the funding or program that in the CIP to implement that. And so that hopefully that will help speed up those high priority projects.
Thank you.
Other questions? Suresh, go ahead.
I had a point of clarification, Jeff. Last time we used the term bike boulevard, and there was some clarification about it. I just want to make sure that I understand. You're not using that terminology in this report anywhere, correct?
I'm not using bike boulevard. I think that it can lead to some confusion, and I want to keep it flexible enough for staff in the future to determine if any of these bike routes warrant the need for traffic calming and an upgrade to a bike boulevard.
Gotcha. And the second question I had was, so the class 3 bike routes are delineated in the map, but other than traffic calming, what is the proposal for all the newly proposed class 3 bike routes?
I think that the what makes it more than just a line on a map would be signage and or some sort of pavement marking to identify it as a route. And so I think that that's kind of the difference between what makes it. That's kind of a minimum expectation of a bike route, is that somebody out there driving or bicycling should know that they're on a designated bicycle route and reminded that it's a shared space for bicyclists and drivers.
And will they be consistent across the plan? I mean, will there be some part signage versus road signs, or I guess is a proposal to make it all consistent?
I think we're looking for feedback. We'd love to get some feedback tonight about the difference. There was some discussion in the task force meeting about cost and effectiveness of pavement marking versus signage. And so I'd love to get some feedback about what you think is most appropriate, most effective, and most Los Altos context sensitive.
Okay. And I had a request. The presentation that you just did with the tables that showed the changes, will that be available for us before we can send comments?
We'll go ahead and post this presentation onto the commission agenda packet after today.
Okay, thanks, Sonia.
Jeff, just to email me your current version after the meeting, please.
Mm-hmm. Will do.
More questions? Jeff, I have 2 questions for you. The first one, I see a whole bunch of little green short segments, like one off of University Avenue near Shrew Park, sort of like, seems like it's the bike trail to nowhere. And I see also a whole bunch of them throughout the city, also in South Los Altos. Can you explain to me what these are?
Oh, in the existing map or the proposed?
I don't know the existing one, at least the one, attachment item 2, attachment A in the packet. So I think that would be what you have actually exhibited right now on the screen.
Many of the green, what we're calling multi-use paths, are the neighborhood connectors between the cul-de-sacs. And so they're shared spaces, bicyclists and pedestrians can use them, but that's just trying to document all of the connections.
But I know those connectors. I know exactly where they are, but let's focus on one of them.
Okay.
So the one next to Shrew Park, for example. If you look at Shrew Park in the, I would say, mid-screen, where you have that square that shows the downtown area, underneath it, there's Shrew Park. You go up a little bit, you go up a little bit more. Actually, no, this is good. Yeah, where you are now.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at Shrew Park, and you go a little bit above Shrew Park, there's a green line. Seems to be like a bike path to nowhere. So again, I'm not trying to be picky here, but I think I would encourage you to make sure that all those little segments here that are not connectors, we kind of have an understanding of what they are. There's a whole bunch of them, by the way, too, on the south end of town, but I think it just, I'll let you kind of examine them separately. The
Yeah.
ones that are connectors, they're legit, but the ones that are not, just make sure that they're not confusing to anyone. So let me get on to the bigger question. If you were to pick two of the recommendations today, what would they be?
Yeah. I'll take another, Chair, I'll take another look at that. That could be, there is, I think, a connection on Old Altos Road that might be showing up there, but I'll take another look at these, these little standalone trails.
Thank you.
So your question, if I could pick two?
Yeah, what would they be?
Hard for me to say. I heard it sounded like just, I felt like 3 out of 4 comments, and this could be my own interpretation, were about San Antonio Road. And so I would like to really let the city explore and study this critical connection between the downtown and Los Altos High. I think that that's something that would respond to a need that I'm hearing loud and clear. That would be one. And then I think implementing the class 1 that's been prepared and talked about on Miramonte would be another strong one. But those are just 2 that come to mind. Yeah, the biggest thing that I heard also was just, Foothill Expressway is the main way that people travel in Los Altos to get from south, central, and north. And there aren't any good bike connections, and it's a barrier to get across. And so I'd also look at those crossings that we've got proposed in both the bike and ped plan that will serve double purpose. So sorry if I can't be more specific. I think it'll be interesting to see what the prioritization process tells us and then come back to that question.
Thank you. You're gonna actually, that was a segue for my next question. And that is, when do we expect, or should we expect to see these recommendations measured against the criteria that we set forth in the vision process? So we had a bunch of criteria that said safety, connectivity, et cetera, et cetera. So how do we map those recommendations against those criteria and then score them and identify priority lists based on that?
That's already been presented to this group, and there is now a methodology in place that's been blessed by the CSC that we will follow and then score each of these projects. And then I'll come back to you and share with you that score, and then they'll be separated into low, medium, and high priority.
Great, thank you.
And then just to make a quick note, that is the proposal for you to review next month. So it won't be very long that you have to wait to get that proposal and first cut establishment of the ranking criteria.
Wonderful, thank you. Any further questions before we move on to the Fed side? All right, I don't see any. It's back to you, Jeff.
Okay, let me scoot forward.
Chair, while Jeff is bringing that up, I assume we'll be able to make comments after we take public feedback.
Only if you're nice to me.
Thank you. I'm always nice to you.
Yes, of course. Joking aside, yes, of course.
Okay, so very similarly, we explored the 2015 pedestrian network improvement map. I will say that there were, unlike the bicycle network, there were walkway and path recommendations in 2015 that I did not carry over into the 2021 update. And the reason I did that is because these are extremely sensitive for Los Altos and costly. And there's not been a whole lot of new walkways that have been implemented in the last 6 years. And so I wanted to be really thoughtful and strategic about which ones moved forward. And maybe I went too far to the extreme. I'll be looking for that feedback tonight. But I really wanted to prioritize completing walkways that connected to schools where there already was an established walkway, but just ended mid-block for some reason that was pretty arbitrary. So I wanted to complete those gaps. And I also wanted to complete walkways on arterial roads where people don't have space. There might be too many, a high volume of cars. And so we wanted to provide space, at least on one side of those arterials. And so that is what carried forward into the 2020 update. And then we looked at spot improvements. We looked at every one of them that was proposed in 2015. And then we went through and added in input that we received from the interactive online map and input that we received from surveys, from emails, from task force meetings, concept plan lines, were included as well. I will mention that anything that was included in the school improvement plans is not double counted here. It is not redundant to this map, so you will not see a dot for the school improvement projects. So just want to make sure that that's clear, that that will be done separately. That will be held within the Safe Routes to School component of the Complete Street Master Plan. This is the universe beyond that small limited area around school frontages and the few blocks around each school site. And so we have 64 individual spot improvements, and then we have sidewalk or walkway improvements. And then in purple, sorry, that's in brown, that's dashed. And then in magenta or purple are the major maintenance and enhancements to existing paths and walkways. This is also borrowed from the downtown vision plan, so it's consistent with that. You can see like item number 9 is the roundabout. Item number 57 is the pedestrian overcrossing. It's consistent with that planning document. We know that not every crosswalk or sidewalk looks the same in Los Altos, and that's by design, and that's by keeping within the rural context and character of the city. And so in this plan, Alta and city staff will not be proposing that every walkway needs to look like a concrete walkway that you see here. It could take the form of crushed stone, crushed gravel. It could be an AC berm like this, where it's at street level. There's a lot of different contexts in which dedicated space for pedestrians could be designed and built. The key here is that there is space for pedestrians that's not sharing it and mixing with a parking lane or a travel lane. So these are the gap closures of new sidewalk or walkways that are being proposed. These are the major maintenance enhancements to existing walkways and paths. And then there are spot improvements that follow under 3 major categories. Roadway design is the first one. And so these spot improvements could include things like curb extensions, changing the radius of the turns to make them tighter, so you slow down turning traffic, modifying skewed intersections, adding in traffic calming treatments like traffic circles, removing slip lanes, creating shared streets, adding in bike boxes or bike lane approaches, and skip boxes through intersections. Then there's the next bucket of improvements that are crossing improvements. And so these things are like marking high visibility crosswalks. These are the ladder crosswalks that could be yellow in school zones or white outside of school zones. Adding in curb ramps at intersections, pedestrian scale lighting, standard crosswalks, pedestrian undercrossings or overcrossings, adding in refuge islands so that pedestrians only have to cross 1 lane of traffic at a time instead of multiple lanes. The third bucket are signs, signals, and signal timing. So these would be new stop signs or doing the warrant analysis studies to consider stop signs, adding in flashing beacons, or what we see a lot in Los Altos are in-sign lighting or in-street lighting, hybrid beacons or hawks, traffic and pedestrian signal changes, such as adding a signal phase for pedestrians, a leading pedestrian interval. So a pedestrian could establish themselves in the crosswalk before the light turns green for motor vehicles, and things like yield here to ped signs. Some of the comments that we heard back from the task force were to prioritize walkway investments wisely. And there was a comment really to reference the pedestrian walkway supply and demand analysis that was completed in 2015. And that really looked at all the walkways and missing gaps in the city and compared those with where there would be high demand. And so if there was already a high supply and high demand met, we don't need to propose anything there. But what we really need to do is figure out where there would be a high demand for people walking, such as in the downtown or near downtown or near schools and parks, and where there isn't that supply met. Also, comment to examine locations where high density housing is planned to make sure supply is anticipated and not just reactionary. Looking at South Los Altos, it looked like there was missing walkway investments, but supply could already be met. I'll just mention that I went back after that meeting and looked at that, and that's exactly what happened. There was a lot of supply that had already been met with existing walkways. Second major category of comments, we're thinking about access to downtown. This is an area where there's a lot of people that I think walk in Los Altos, but they do it for recreation and not for transportation purposes. They're out walking their dog or walking with neighbors or family, or walking to parks, or maybe schools. But in terms of getting to downtown for shopping or other trips that would replace a vehicle trip, really the focus should be around the downtown and maybe around El Camino Real as major commercial strips. So really focusing on the routes that are within a half mile or mile of downtown and the new community center. Hawthorne might be a good bike priority street to get downtown. So the comment was to look for a pedestrian priority paired street that could also serve a similar function, and look closely at Edith for pedestrian needs regarding safety. And there was a comment also made about map legibility. There's a lot being produced and shared on this map. Loyola Corners has a lot of dots that are clustered together, and it's really difficult to tell what they're pointing to. And so that's one area that I think we need to go back and revise. There could be others, and so looking for feedback as well. And so that concludes the presentation on the pedestrian network recommendations. And I'll pause there to answer clarifying questions.
Questions? Suresh?
One thing I mean, sort of that jumps out to me between the ped map and the bike map. The bike map looks like a network. When we look at the map, it's obviously a network, and at least there's a sense of, okay, we can go from point A to point B. Was the intention for the ped map different? It just shows the improvements, or is there a plan to make the ped map a network as well?
It's a very good question, and something that we did explore. And I don't know if, and I can't remember if this group has seen, you have seen all of the walk and roll suggested route maps.
Yeah.
Those maps do include existing sidewalk or walkways as a layer that comes up. When we looked at adding it to these maps with the recommendations, it took a complicated map, kind of even more complicated into the extreme, and we couldn't find a way to really show that legibly. So it's been a debate that we've had, and something that I'd look for feedback, I think, from this group to see if that's something we should try and keep working on to show where they're existing. I will say that there will never, I won't say never, it's hard for me to imagine, based off what I know about Los Altos and the city's priorities and its funding, that I don't think there will ever be a walkway network on every street in the city. And so finding logical connections that link together might be something that you would direct us back to look at, Commissioner. And so if there are specific areas that are a gap, we'd be looking for feedback about where we can fill those in.
More questions? All right, so if there are no questions from the commissions, I want to actually get questions from the public, or at least give the public the chance to make some comments. All right, going once, going twice. Last call for the public to make comments on item 2. Okay, back to the commission for feedback. Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think that the work that's been done so far is really excellent given where we are. But I also think that going forward, there really has to be some thought about how it's actually going to work and how we solve some glaring problems. And I think the San Antonio Road example is a perfect example of that. Because of the high school traffic that goes to and from downtown from San Antonio, and what the impact will be of improving one side of the street in a very different way than we improve the other side. The other thing that I noticed on the bike map was the proposed dotted lines that go through the downtown Los Altos area. And I think there really needs to be some thought about, if we are going to encourage cyclists and pedestrians to travel to downtown, what do they do when they get there, especially if there's bike traffic downtown? Right now, prior to COVID, I think we all know that it never worked really well given the way that traffic is managed or not managed and the way the parking works. So it would be great to get your input, Jeff, as to if there were going to be improvements, how they could actually be made to keep both cyclists and pedestrians safe through the downtown corridors. And I think the only other comment I would make was similar to the one I made earlier, which is how do we make sure that we don't have so many priorities that none of them are feasible, or that it's not easy to differentiate what actually gets done in the first 12, 24, 36 months prior to, you know, the final output.
Thank you, Steve. Other commissioners' input? Comments? Commissioner Diaz, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. 7 points. One, I think that we need to really think hard about the Sharrow or bike route, the class 3, and the implementation of that, and ask ourselves the hard question: are we doing too many? Are we falling back on a Sharrow because it's easy and feels good, or because it's really necessary? And if it's really necessary, why aren't we doing a bike lane? And just thinking a little bit harder about that. It feels a little cavalier to just throw Sharrows down. As you heard last night, many cyclists disdain the Sharrows. They're not safe. They don't really do the effect that you're trying to achieve. Point number 2, Miramonte is an important bike corridor. And while we do have mention of I think it's a class, I can't tell what you've got on Miramonte, to be quite honest.
Class 1.
Class 1, thank you, multi-use path. Now I know that we attempted that in the past, and that did not go well. So I would highlight that as a prickly problem if you try and attempt that again. So please note that there are ardent fans on either side of that argument, if you will. Point number 3, let's please officially go to the county and say, designate, not delineate. Let's make that an official bike corridor. And if we can do a separated, that'd be wonderful, but I think it's beyond the scope of what Santa Clara and the county would want to do. Point number 4, super important that whenever you do a network that you study very hard at the connections. Stops, what does it look like? What is the experience of the user? Because the user doesn't know I'm leaving Los Altos and entering Mountain View, but the experience is dramatic. And I think we need to make sure we reach out to our partners in Mountain View and Palo Alto and Los Altos Hills to make sure we take a hard look at those connections as, say, El Monte drops in to Springer, or Los Altos Ave drops into El Camino Real. What is the experience of the user at those junctions, and make sure we do a job there. I know it's really problematic at the end of Fremont as it dumps into that bridge. You literally are just dropped into the middle of the lane, which is awkward on the best moments. I'd also ask that when we look at this, we look for optimization opportunities. And you did hint at that, Jeff, so I think you did hear my comments from last night, is look for those parallel routes and optimize that traffic. Los Altos Ave, let's optimize for bikes and sub-optimize for cars. Let's make it a pain in the neck for cars to go down, but a delightful experience for a cyclist. And then on San Antonio Road, that is clearly optimized for vehicular high-speed traffic. Let's not optimize for bikes and peds and cars on that corridor. I think there's an opportunity there that we might be under investing on a little bit. I'm also looking for opportunities for something super bold, one-way streets, maybe in the downtown area. Maybe there's an opportunity there to control traffic, provide more safety, and have one-way streets. And really think hard about that. The pairing of Hillview and Hawthorne is an opportunity for one-way streets. Hillview in front of the new community center, and then Hawthorne 1 block away. Could they be opposite direction one-way streets? And then finally, my comment is about consistency. Let's make sure we're consistent in our application of the treatments across the city so that as users traverse the city, it's a common experience. You don't have to guess what you're going to do next and predict where things are going to go. Let's keep it easy and simple and consistent for the users. And when we get this all done, let's have some wayfinding like they do in Mountain View. 2 miles to downtown, 1 mile to El Camino Real. Wayfinding that helps a cyclist or a pedestrian know they're close. Keep going. You're almost there. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Ambiel. More comments? Okay, Cindy.
Hi, mine's a quick comment. I think I know that the Complete Streets Master Plan is a little bit of a misnomer, and we have these different elements that we're working on, but it's really difficult for me to picture what the city is going to look like when we have like the walk and roll map, the safe routes to school, the PED network, all these improvements. Like, we kind of contain them as separate projects, but we can't see them all on the same map. And so I know, Jeff, you said you tried and it was difficult, but if there's a way where you can layer that on in like a different color or in a different, like maybe with less detail on those aspects, just so we can see how it would be reflected on the map and where those improvements would be, that might help. I don't know. I don't know how many, little, how much that would add to the map and complicate it and make it more complex. But in my mind, a master plan should show how do pedestrians move across the city, regardless of if it's part of one project versus another. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Okay. Others? All right, I think I'll give you my quick comments here, Jeff. Stacy?
And I have comments too, Nadine, whenever you want.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So my comments are, I want to echo what Suzanne is saying. I don't think we should take the easy way out on class 2 bike lanes and just change them to class 3 because we think it's easier. I think our plan has to reflect what is the right thing to do, what we think is the right thing to do. And then we need to do in community engagement meetings to collect people's input, kind of talk to them about what we're doing before we throw concept plan line drawings up on the thing. I also think we should consider a class 3B. If I remember right, I looked at some other plans. I think it's Cupertino that has a 3B. So a class 3 is a bike route. We have some bike routes today. They just have a green sign on each end of it that say bike route. I'm not really sure what they offer bicyclists. So a 3B could be something with sharrows and or possibly traffic calming. I know Suzanne talked about cyclists don't like sharrows. Certainly a bike lane is preferred. There may be cases where a bike lane is not possible, and I know that some families do like sharrows on some certain streets for kids going to school. So I think we have to create a balance of what's the right thing to do, what's possible, and who are the users. The next point is, I do think we need a bike facility that's parallel to El Camino Real. And I'm not sure a couple green signs on the end of the route or even a couple sharrows is gonna do it. So I do think that that's an area worth studying, and similarly coming up from El Camino Real towards the school areas. And capturing the routes that some of the parents have told us about for the kids coming from the Cuesta neighborhood that go over to Block and even a high school, how they're going through to align our improvements with not every blue line on the school route maps, but the key places. The second comment I have is I do think we need a complete north-south route, and that takes you into all the way into downtown as well. I think that I think the county is coming quite a ways, and I think Foothill Expressway, we may be able to get a bike lane on there. At the same time, if it's not a protected facility, it is not for everybody. And we need a parallel facility then to Foothill. Today, this proposes one going from the south all the way up to, say, Fremont and Springer intersection. But once you hit Fremont and Springer, you don't have, in my mind, a proper parallel bike facility. Those yellow lines that are called bike routes on that map, to me, don't serve it. Equally, I would like to have more insight, and I don't know if that's going to be possible, Jaime and Jeff, to where we're headed with the pavement plan and which of these streets may be getting upgrades, and will that help improve our facilities. So for example, if I take Grant Road between Fremont Avenue and the Mountain View border, okay, we have a bike lane. Okay, you don't have it marked for any upgrade, but the question is, does our plan recognize that that's still an area where we can do improvement on the Class 2 bike lane itself? And I don't know the answer to that because we haven't coordinated with the paving plan. So that would be something that I don't know if it's possible, but I would encourage the doing. And then I think that I agree in the notion of scaling back perhaps on some of those PED plans, because these were plans on the shelf that weren't getting executed. At the same time, we may want to look at having a combination of what is our execution plan over the next 5 years versus what is our longer term visionary plan of where we could be headed. Because I hesitate to just drop all those pathways entirely. And a quick couple more. One is for the, thank you, Chair, is the concept plan line drawings that we've created. There's a lot of community feedback on the interactive maps that I don't think has all been incorporated into those drawings. And I would encourage you, especially since we've asked the community for feedback, to make sure they get incorporated into those drawings. I do think, as I hinted at before, that we need a list of, we need to think about a list of projects we want to study further and maybe focus some on that. And as Suzanne was saying, connectivity to jurisdictions. And another thing that I saw to help with that in the Cupertino plan is they had a list of interface points with not just with other jurisdictions, but other agencies as well. And tracking when those agencies had upcoming projects so they could plan, be on top of that. And I think that's good. And finally, I would say in the plan, and I don't, maybe going through the table of contents yet, but the funding section, I wouldn't just copy paste what's in every bike ped master plan and just say, here's the funding options. I would stop and pause and give it some thought about what's realistic for Los Altos. Which grants are we realistically qualified for? And what do we need to do to assure that we're going to secure that funding? Not just, oh, here's a generic definition of the grants. Oh, you can apply. But what do we need to do to get our ducks in order to apply for those funds? Thank you.
Thank you, Stacey.
Chair, if I could really quick, I just wanted to provide some real quick initial feedback, and for the commissioners that haven't given feedback to provide that perspective. This is your chance as a commission to shape these network maps. And so I do appreciate the feedback that says, go back and think about this and make this connection. I think Alto's done a pretty good job given the direction that we've told them to do. The city will not, we at staff will not recommend changing a street that is proposed as a route to a bike lane if we know that the bike lanes will not fit without parking removal through a residential neighborhood. We will not do it. If you as a commission want us to consider that, you need to be very specific, tell us where you want that to be considered, or else the plan will not be revised in any way to prioritize a route to a bike lane network. If it doesn't fit, within the existing right of way without meaning that you have to remove half the street out of parking. We're not going to propose that. It sets us up for failure during implementation. So you guys really need to think about your recommendations. I'm not really looking for the high level, go back and think about this, because we're not going to change anything for you if that's what you're telling us to do. You guys have till June 9th to really think about your comments and give us specific comments about how you want to see this network changed. Because if you don't, when you see the prioritization network or prioritization ranking at the end of June at your commission meeting, it's going to be based off of the maps that we have. So please think about your comments. If you haven't had a chance to look at them and you don't have specific network changes right now, that's okay. You have until June 9th, and we gave the task force the same time frame. But please give us specific comments, because you're going to miss your opportunity to make the substantial change that you're looking for, because we're not going to at the staff level propose changes to the network that we know don't fit within the network. And so I just wanted to make sure you see that perspective.
Thank you, Jaime. Actually, well said too. I support that wholeheartedly. So I want to encourage all the commissioners to be very specific in their feedback when they give it to you in that email format. So let me give you and Jeff my inputs. And first, let me just say thank you to Jeff for the thoughts and the rigor that you put into this. It's very clear, it's very apparent that this was not just a quick thing over a scotch, and that was well put, a lot of thought through over perhaps many, many hours. I would challenge ourselves as a commission, because whatever you have in here, I'm willing to bet you money that if we come back 1 year from now, and look at those maps again, we're going to say to ourselves, oh my goodness, what were we thinking? That's just the nature of planning. It's not just unique to us, it's nature to every project. When you've got more time and they're changing conditions, you go back and say, oh my goodness, what did I think at the time? And so the way I'm going to measure the success of this master plan, both on the pedestrian side and on the bike side, is how we're going to execute. In other words, if this plan is written and it's going to be a beautiful document, and we come back in 5 years and said, what have we done? And all we're going to say, but look, the maps look pretty, then we failed miserably. And so I'm going to put the challenge back to you. I don't have any particular specific comments to you, Jeff, but I'm going to put the burden on you to put equal amount of thought as you have so far into the prioritization. Because what I'd like to do is push us as a city, as a community, to pick one project per year for the next 5 years. And what are they going to be and why? And so that's, I think, where I'd like us to be on June 9th. So June, the next June meeting, end of June.
So June 30. June 30.
So by then, that's where I would really encourage you and Jaime to come back. And I guess Marissa would be joining soon, so that'll be her baptism by fire. And so I think, what would you say if we were to pick one project per year for the next 5 years? What are they going to be? Thank you. And with that, we close item 2, and we now move to item 3, which is the safe routes to school.
Really quick, before you close this item,
Yeah.
one of the other attachments that we had put into your report for this specific item was a draft table of contents for the merged bike and ped plans. I don't know if you guys wanted to provide any initial feedback on that, but I know you guys all asked for it last month, and so we did add it to the agenda packet. So if you do have any thoughts, hey, please let us know, because that'll also help guide Jeff and his team as they're starting to develop that document over the next month and a half.
Noted.
What is the deadline for that one? Is it June 9th? Or do you have a different deadline for that?
For the table of contents? Yeah, I don't know, Jeff, what do you say? I would say maybe feedback before the end of June.
We are going to start writing it now. We can't wait. So we need that probably June 9th as well, if it can be coming in. Yeah, we've got
I have feedback. I can just write it up and send it.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, commissioners. It's a pleasure to see you again. Thanks for all this wonderful feedback, and look forward to getting any of your written comments in as well. Looking forward to seeing you next month.
Thank you.
Jeff, great
All right.
work.
Thanks.
All right.
Take care.
Okay, and I'm now officially co-host here because Gaku had to step away. And so our next item here, I'll let you introduce the item, Chair, but Andrian from Alta is here to discuss that as well.
All right, item 3 is the Safe Routes to School Education and Encouragement Program update. Andrian, thank you for coming back. I know you've presented this before. Welcome back to the commission.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad to be here to provide some updates. I'll share my screen. I have a presentation. Okay. So just as a quick reminder, the Safe Routes to School EE for Education and Encouragement program focuses on identifying opportunities to create encouragement and education activities for inside and outside the classroom. And this would possibly include also community-based activities led by the city. So last time in March, I provided an update on the stakeholder interviews we were conducted. So we've completed all those 9 stakeholders interview, and I will give a brief summary of the main findings and takeaways. And also I'm here to present the next steps, which is developing recommendation to help with the creation and the implementation of activities and curriculum next school year. So hoping to get also your feedback on those draft recommendation. So we have interviewed representative from, well, we conducted 9 interviews, representative from Los Altos School District, Cupertino Union School District, the Complete Street Commission, Los Altos Youth Commission, the Police Department, the Bicycle Outfitter, Greentown, Los Altos. Those interviews help us to get a sense of existing Safe Routes to School efforts in Los Altos and in the schools. Also to know what are the challenges and barriers to walking and biking to school, find the opportunities to improve Safe Routes to School program, to know what are challenges and opportunity in implementing Safe Routes to School program, what are the priorities, and who are the other key stakeholders to engage in the program development. So the stakeholders have identified the parent perception and the lack or gaps in pedestrian and bicycle infrastructures has main challenges to walk to school, along with having a sustained, well, the lack of a sustained and consistent pedestrian and bicycle education program in the schools. Also, the interview showed the need to build local partnerships and improve coordination and communication between the stakeholders. And we also had some opportunities identified to integrate a Safe Routes to School curriculum in the school with the school day. And it showed also the need to provide education and encouragement activities to both parent and student. And so to engage parent and student in the program, along with setting success criteria for Los Altos Safe Routes to School program. So the priority that were highlighted were having, well, developing an in-class education curriculum, having parent engagement, but also parent-child activities, having strong data collection and also evaluation criteria, and improve communication around Safe Routes to School, so between stakeholders, between the city and the school district, but also around specific Safe Routes to School event and activities. So the next step, well, Alta is working on writing a memo that will detail implementation steps for potential activities and a curriculum next school year. So the memo will include existing policies and effort review and recommendation, a best practices review around 6 key topics that were identified from the stakeholders interview, a list of program and activity recommendation, and curriculum recommendations. So this memo will set goals, costs, staff needed, implementation steps, potential fundings to help draft the Safe House to School program. So I'll give some, well, the draft recommendation as for the policy recommendation. So build local partnership and improve coordination and communication between stakeholders citywide. So this could take the form of convening a Safe House to School task force, including main stakeholders. Also officialize school district engagement that would identify each stakeholder's responsibility or event that can take place through the program. And encourage schools to create, for example, Safe House to School champion position. Make sure that school and school district policies support safe walking and biking to school. So most of the school district in their policies have, in their student wellness or student safety policies, have a point on walking and biking or encouraging healthy lifestyle, but having something that specifically support program that encourage walking and biking to school. Encourage the implementation of a standardized Safe House to School curriculum in each school. So also explore the possibility to add topics to the school board curriculum, explore incentive for teachers to include those topics in school, and work with existing curriculum, and create a culture of Safe House to School citywide and build awareness. So recognize walk and walk to school days, develop guidance for school district or for the city to include Safe House to School in transportation, land use project, develop partnership. For 6 key topics, we will review the best practices, and from those practices also develop recommendations. So the topic area that were identified were pedestrian safety curriculum, either in physical education classes or after school, bike safety curriculum, social science and STEM curriculum, walking school buses, walk and roll to school days, and evaluation activities. So having the best practices from neighboring cities and what are the goals for each topics, staff needs, technology opportunities. As for the program recommendation, the memo will include specific activities and events that could be implemented for next school year. That includes community engagement material, walking school bus, parental activities, walk and roll to school days, technology, and evaluation. So here just other example as for community engagement, having crossing guard appreciation days, parent engagement and education, walking school bus. So having really each steps for the community about how to develop walking school bus, what are the needs, the material, the costs. Family radio, how to organize a family radio on weekend or after school, walk-in school day, and as for evaluation activities, which kind of surveys we could use, student tallies or other ways to collect data, having bike rack counts, etc. For Safe Routes to School curriculum recommendations, so A Safe Routes to School curriculum can meet California state learning standard, especially the health education and physical education standards. So we would explore 3 kind of potential curriculum: the pedestrian curriculum, bicycle, and social science and STEM. So for each, we would identify topics and also which grades to target, and hoping that having those those review and step could help choose which kind of curriculum to develop for next school year, and also having the school district involved in the development of this curriculum that could be delivered in classroom or after school with the city Parks and Recs department. So here an example. So both of the example I'll show meet California learning standards. So it makes it easier for the school district and the teacher to deliver it at school, since it's aligned with the learning standard and goals. So as for the next step, well, I hope to get your feedback on the draft recommendation, and the program development will be created in July and August after this the memo is complete. So we would present the memo, the outline of the program in June, and then start the development to have something ready next school year in the fall. So if you have questions, or like, I know it's it was a lot. But...
Okay, thank you, Andréane. Questions? I know some of you have been involved with that. So any questions from the commission? Suzanne, go ahead, please.
I've got about 10 questions.
Can you trim them to 5, please?
Yeah, first one, how will you measure success? How will you know this has been successful? I don't see any metrics around that.
Yeah, so what I have showed is an outline of the memo that we will create, and there will be definitely more details in this memo that will be completed by June. So with the best practices review, we'll see what are, well, success stories, how other programs, successful program have measured their program, and make recommendation on which data, which activities, who to involve for.
Okay. What is the base curriculum you plan to use to start yours on, or are you starting from scratch?
So there's different options. Like there's already lots of existing materials, both for bicycle or pedestrian curriculum, and we hope to, with the memo and having like different, knowing which what are the costs, how many lessons you could have per curriculum, and working in collaboration with the school district to identify which curriculum we can develop. So we probably won't develop those 3 curriculum. There's already those kind that exist, but for Los Altos, with the review, we hope to show, well, to come back to you and show you, well, to develop a pedestrian curriculum, you can have like 6 lessons with those topics, targeting, for example, elementary student for the pedestrian curriculum, having a bicycle curriculum for middle schoolers, since they are more likely to ride alone. So
what's your plan to recruit instructors and volunteers? That can always be a very difficult challenge. My experience in being a bike instructor is that most people who teach bike safety don't ride a bike. What's your plan?
So if It depends if we have the collaboration of the schools and PE teachers willing to deliver the curriculum. The curriculum is really made so the teachers can deliver it. So if they have interest, they can do it. Also, we have Greentown Los Altos. They have LCI instructors, and they showed interest in collaborating and helping with the curriculum, both elaborating and delivering it.
My last question, I have many more.
Mhm.
Talk to me about data collection. My experience with data collection, that student counts, teacher counts, and bike rack tallies are insufficient. How will you collect data that's going to be rigorous and valuable and useful?
So I'll try and answer that really quick. So we have in the budget for the fiscal year 21-22, $50,000 to start the deployment of a citywide data collection equipment that would count 24/7 along preferably school routes to see how much bicycle and pedestrian activity we're getting around the city. So that could be one metric that as the education encouragement program starts to go underway, we can see what type of behavior change or any impact we're having through these efforts in increases or decreases in walking and biking. So that is one thing that we're slated to do for starting next fiscal year.
All right, I'll convey the rest of my questions via email. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Suzanne. Stacy, I'm sure you have 5 or less comments.
Yes, and you're gonna love this. I will actually yield my 5 questions to Suzanne.
Oh my goodness. Okay, all right.
Such a gift.
Wow.
Thank you. Wow. How will you ensure the schools adopt your policy? One of your memos is ensure that the schools, how will you ensure that they're a state entity?
Yeah, so this is more developing like a partnership with the school district, and well, how we we did it, for example, in Menlo Park, is like having the school district involved in task force meeting, having having stakeholders meeting, explaining the program, make sure everyone is on board with the Safe Routes to School program and goals. So we developed like a joint resolution between the city and the school district that identified like the responsibilities, the common objectives, potential events. So that was a way that everyone is on the same page regarding the Safe Routes to School program, and having like regular stakeholders meetings.
Adriana, let me try and help you there really quick. Let me just try and help you really fast. So,
yeah.
So we can't force any of the school districts to adopt anything that we develop. All we can do is ask them to work with us to jointly develop a curriculum that everyone feels comfortable in deployment within the classroom. And one of the really nice outcomes of the work that Adrian and the Alta team did for us over the spring and doing all these stakeholder interviews is that we did get a commitment from Los Altos School District and from Cupertino Unified to work with us to implement some type of a pilot program in the coming school year. That's one of the reasons why we asked Alta to develop an implementation plan for us over the summer so we can begin to develop that curriculum in partnership with the school districts. And so we don't know which schools it's going to be as part of Los Altos School District yet. We know it'll probably make Montclair for Cupertino Unified, but over the summer as we're developing that, we're going to develop it jointly with each of those school districts to make sure that there's some consistency in the materials that get developed for use in the in-class curriculum distribution, and that ultimately we develop for larger deployment that has buy-in from the very beginning. That's the most that we can do. But to your point, if that's where you're going with it, we can't force them to adopt anything. But we can
All right.
definitely work with them to develop something jointly. That's what we plan to do.
Thank you. I hope that you will modify your language to suit, to make sure people understand that. If this is a pilot opportunity in this coming school year, what are the measures for your pilot? Is it a minimum of 2 schools, 3 schools? And what data will tell you that the pilot is successful and encourage the next 2 schools to adopt?
So I don't think we have that yet, Suzanne.
Okay.
So again, you know, the school district at Los Altos hasn't said, you know, which schools they're going to have us do this with. They just committed to doing it with 2 schools along with
2 schools. Okay. That
2 schools at
that was
LASD
my
and
answer.
1
2
school at
schools.
Cupertino.
All right. I have a lot more comments. I'll yield the floor.
All right.
Stacy, you don't get back your 3 questions, Stacy. You passed them on already, so we got to go on somebody else.
Okay. Suresh, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Andrian, can you go back to the slide that you had, you know, your goals for the program, I think in the very beginning?
The policy recommendation goals.
No, there was prior to that. What were the goals for the program?
I'm not sure which slides. Is it the very first?
Yeah, I think it was at the very beginning.
Okay, that one. That one.
No, not that. Maybe the next one. Yeah, there were 4 goals you had. Yeah, that's one. Yes.
That
No,
one,
not.
yeah.
Yeah. So you know, one of the questions the question I had was, these 4 goals. There is a lot going on, and I mean, there is a significant amount of work, and I think this program maybe taking on too much. And the question I had was, what is the mechanism to sustain this and make these goals happen? And I guess maybe this, you know, Jaime can answer this question. Is you know, one of the challenges is you may implement this for a year, maybe do a pilot and then start to kick it off, but what is the plan to sustain it? And I think that, you know, that's something that should go in, that should be part of the solution here. I guess what I'm saying is come up with, you know, or pare down these goals to things that you can implement in a sustainable manner. You know, this you're talking about engaging schools. You're talking about engaging other organizations with the city to help do this, and needing volunteers that may be available for a year, but not the next year. So the question, I guess, is an overall question: is, you know, really think about how we can make this sustainable.
Yeah. So
Actually,
go ahead, Jaime. Sorry.
let me try and take that one on because it's funding related. So yeah, sure. Thank you, Suresh, for the comment. And that is the main challenge here. Whatever we get started, you know, it doesn't mean anything unless we sustain it long term. The program that Andrian is working through, that was funded last year by the City Council, gives funding to Alto for a minimum of 2 years. And we're using, and we've already committed to use, our VTA 2016 Measure B, education and encouragement funding, for an additional 2 years. So this program is funded for a minimum of 4 years. And what I would say is, to keep it going, I'm going to kick it back to you guys. You know, we're going to look for your help when you're looking at future operating and capital budgets, you know, in future years. You know, we need you to help ask the City Council to make sure they set aside more funding to take this program. Maybe once it starts to take off and we prove the pilots are valuable, you know, we've got it funded for potentially up to 4 years as a part-time basis. Maybe after another year, it needs to become a full-time committed staff person versus just a half-time contract. So those are the things that, as you're seeing implementation and successes and some challenges that we have to correct on, you know, we would want to determine at what point do we make this a full-time effort. And I think that's what's more important, is in addition to sustaining it, making sure it's really, you know, a long-term commitment with like full-time staff.
So, I'm taking it that then the recommendation, or, you know, the memo that you're working on will include that aspect of it. I mean, we need to look at a trade-off of what it's going to cost and what we can sustain,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so you are going to make a recommendation for us to look into that, to be able to weigh that, because I guess I'm not getting a sense of what that cost would be.
The memo that she's working on is definitely going to be taking advantage of all the time we have Alta to work on focusing, developing that curriculum, making sure we're working with the school. I think we have funding to get that done. The memo at this point is really going to focus only on the implementation for the pilots for next year. It's not going to focus on the sustainability of that program long term. I think we're going to figure that out over the next year while it's being implemented. And we're not going to do this, in a vacuum. You're our body to run these types of things through. That's why we've been coming to you regularly with updates on this EE program, and we will definitely do so over the summer and as we're implementing, because we want to make sure we're taking things in the right direction, and you're our body to do that in addition to the input we get from the districts. And so I think we can't answer the question about funding today, but I think we will be able to, I would imagine, by the end of the calendar year, as we're hopefully implementing in the fall.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and if I can just add also, for example, recommending that the schools create parent school champion is also another kind of way to sustain it, having officializing a little bit more position around Safe House to School, or having someone at the school district within his job description, Safe House to School coordinator. So those are maybe ways that we can explore and that could help to sustain it.
Okay, Steve, I saw your hand.
Yeah, so I just wanted to commend the program for lofty goals. And I think this is a really hard project. And I think what makes it extremely hard is that the schools right now are struggling with so many pressing problems that they're trying to come back from COVID, and they're trying to do that in a way that satisfies parents, that their kids are getting the right kind of education. And what I've seen with my grandchildren, who, by the way, are, I've got 4 of them, and they are between 4th grade and going into 7th grade. And I think that's right in the sweet spot of the kids that you want to be able to walk and ride to school, maybe a little bit younger, is that you've got to get to the parents. And I think if you get to the parents and you get to a group of parents who can become champions for the program and missionaries through the PTA, then that will get the attraction of the school, because they'll want to support those enthusiastic parents who want their kids to either walk or ride to school. So my only recommendation would be to have one of your strongest areas of emphasis is working with the parents and the PTAs to try to find those individuals who will get behind this program because they want their kids to be on their bikes, to be out walking, to be out doing those kinds of things. And that's the way you're going to get to the school administrators.
Thanks.
That's the only thing I was going to say.
Thank you, Steve. Tom?
I'll just yield all my questions and time to Stacy.
Oh my goodness, I am gonna have to put some rules around this thing. Okay, all right, go ahead, Stacy.
That's great. Thank you. So just briefly, I think everybody else has made really good questions and comments. I will just say that I love the idea of the pilot program because I think that helps us get started on the right foot and partnering with people and going towards building something sustainable. I think that if it doesn't work within the schools, I'm totally open to the Parks and Recs thing or some other program where we can get families who are interested to sign up to even get started as well. Or maybe that's the option for the middle school kids and elementary is different. I think I agree with what Steve has said about getting engaged parents and absolutely having one person as part of the PTAs at the schools. That was a great idea, Andrian. It needs more than that, particularly for the for encouragement. If you have administrative buy-in with a parent, yes. For education, the challenge that comes in is the teachers themselves. A, are they certified, right? Do they have that LCI thing? So there may be some way to provide that curriculum to them. And that's also why I'm in support of Parks and Recs programs, maybe for middle schoolers or something too, because those LCI programs for families have never really been in Los Altos or near us. You have to go far away to go to them. So that might be nice as a complementary thing. But the other thing with getting teaching resources to do this inside the classrooms is the teachers are unionized. And a parent advocate at each school isn't really going to overcome the how do you get the union to agree to allow the PE teacher to become an LCI and then teach it in PE class. So I think the pilot program with partnerships with the schools is good, recognizing that this is kind of a challenge for us. And we have to find a way as a city to figure out the way we can work past that and get buy-in.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
But really good work so far. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Stacy. I'm going to actually take a twist on what Steve said, and I'm going to say that you need the grandparents to be engaged, not the parents to be engaged. So maybe Steve will be your test case and see if he can take those policies and get his grandkids to walk to school. If he can get them to do that as a commissioner, then I think we have high probability of success. And the joke on his side, I'm all in favor of experimentation. As lofty as those goals may look like, I'm always in favor of experimentation and trying something different. The trick, however, in experimentation is you need to know when to stop, because you've gone too far and you have not succeeded and you don't want to keep banging your head against the wall. So what I'd like to sort of see here is criteria where we come back in 1 year, not in 4 years, but in 1 year, and sort of say, hey, are we making progress? And how do we measure that progress? No hand waving. No hand waving. Hand waving is the sure sign of failure because you don't know what you're talking about. And so we want to have some concrete measures as to how do we measure success? I think one of those questions was posed earlier. How do we measure progress? Success is actually not an easy thing, but I don't think that should be a hurdle for us to go and experiment and try different things and sort of see what might work. And progress also may not necessarily be on all the dimensions. Progress may be only on one dimension perhaps, and that's where we're going to put more energy onto it. But I would hate us to go and put this thesis here. I think you got a certain framework and that sort of thesis for success. Another question is what portion of that is going to work, what portion is not going to work. And then we want to focus on those parts. And so I would encourage you to come back and sort of say, for each one of those items that you've listed, we need to come back in 1 year and sort of gauge the progress. And if we meet certain milestones, we need to establish those milestones, then we continue. And if we don't meet those milestones, then we drop that particular item and then focus on the ones that we have met the milestones. So I think that's the clarity that I would look forward to sort of see from you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the public. I'm sorry, Suresh, did I skip?
If you're taking comments, I just had one additional comment.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. I would, if at all possible, I would suggest that through your pilot program for the pilot year, that you keep the task force engaged with the key stakeholders. I think that process will ensure that the transition going the following year is smooth. And second is you get active feedback as the pilot is ongoing. That's one. And the second is if there are 2 schools, then find a way to get the rest of the school representatives in the loop on how the program is going. So I think those are 2 recommendations if that's possible.
Yeah, I completely agree with Suresh, by the way. I mean, I think as you've seen us already as a commission here, Andréane, we try to dive deeper into the minutia. And so to the extent that you can keep the task force involved so they can help us as a commission understand what's working, what's not working, that will be very beneficial. All right, so let me actually then seek any public comments at this point on item 3. Going once, going twice. Last call for any comments for item number 3 on the agenda. Okay, I don't see any. So with that, we move to item number 4, which is the CIP.
Thank you, Chair. Give me 1 second to get my presentation up.
Well, thank you all.
Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you. Okay, let me just run this here. Just confirming that you guys can see my screen.
Yes.
Great, thank you. So this item, our next item is an update on the fiscal year 21-22, which begins on July 1st, specifically the capital improvement or CIP program for the city of Los Altos. I think Jim was actually intending to give you this presentation tonight, but he was unable to make tonight's meeting because he had a family emergency that he had to attend. And so he asked me to step in and give this presentation for him. I will admit I'm not as big of an expert on the CIP program as Jim is, but I'm going to definitely do my best to kind of walk you through what I can. So with that, just a quick background. The city does prepare annually both a operating budget or general fund budget to fund things like staff time and police services, city services, and that's really focused on operations of the city. The capital improvement or CIP program really focuses on the infrastructure improvements that can be deployed through the city on an annual basis. And the CIP document is typically a 5-year horizon planning document. So we're looking at revenues that are going to be coming in over the next 5 years and plan those expenditures knowing the money that's going to be coming down the pipe. But the CIP is only funded annually. And so that is something that a lot of people don't understand. I just want to focus on really quick. So even though when you look through the CIP, you say, hey, this project's funded for 5 years and it's going to get, $1 million over 5 years, but in the first year it's only got $100,000. That means that it only has $100,000, doesn't have $1 million set aside for the future. We spend what we can, and we adjust the budget as priorities change through the year, typically in alignment with city council priorities, which I think this year are very well aligned with the commission's interests. And so with that, I'm going to walk you through the budget, really focusing in on the CIP portion of the transportation projects for the city. So real quick high-level highlights from the program is that there is a substantial increase in the annual street resurfacing program. If you recall some of the discussions that you have had as a commission with Jim in prior meetings, usually the city only had about $1.7 to $1.9 million in its annual street resurfacing program. And that was for both microsurface or slurry seal projects, for major resurfacing where we're grinding down and putting in fresh asphalt, and then the striping that goes along with that. Based off of the city council's interests to want to help increase our pavement condition index or PCI for the city. In the next year, for the 5-year horizon, the city is looking to increase that total allocation from roughly 1.9 to $3.5 million per year. So that's a humongous increase, and that does, we still don't know how that's going to overall change the PCI. We're going to potentially be measuring our PCI again this coming summer or fall. And then we'll do more assessments to see how the extra funding is actually impacting the PCI rating. But this is huge from the standpoint of the bicycle and pedestrian implementation plan, because as a reminder, having started last summer, we actually aligned our street resurfacing program with the bicycle plan, meaning that we selected corridors that had a more substantial impact in creating continuous networks for bicycle facilities. Covington, as an example, is a corridor that we did last year, along with Almond Avenue. We also did El Monte Avenue, the sidewalk gap closure, which has a pedestrian or bicycle element in it as well. And in this coming a program for the current summer that we're in that was limited to the smaller 1.9 budget. We are prioritizing streets like Fremont Avenue, a longer section between Dolores to Springer. We're looking at Campbell Avenue in its entire length and the portion of Eastwood Drive between Miramonte and Covington. So in next year's or next summer's CIP program, we'll have more money to do longer sections of road so that we can really put in continuous sections. Now, we may not do a whole corridor from end to end of the city, but you know, the goal here is progress. That's not so much perfection because you don't have that much money. And so $3.5 million, you'll have a big say in which streets that might touch, you know, again, towards the fall or early part of 2022 when we're finalizing the street resurfacing list for implementation next summer. So and just as a reminder, what is already slated for next summer in the summer of 22 is the entire length of St. Joseph Avenue, which would include a potential sidewalk gap closure element, you know, towards the section closer to the Foothill Expressway area where we have a 2-block gap in facilities. So we could use this program to both close those gaps and provide whatever continuous segments we have following community outreach. So that's huge for us. I really want to highlight and stress that point to make sure you recognize that. The other element that we've advocated for and that the city council during their study session, if I remember correctly, about a week ago, seemed to really like as well was we have planted a total of $500,000, $300 in the coming fiscal year, July 1, and another $200,000 in the coming year after that, 22-23, and that's to implement all of the school improvement map recommendations that Alta's been working on in the item that was discussed earlier tonight. And so that's something that we wanted to see done. Ooh, I put million, but that should be 300,000, not 300 million. And that's something that we wanted to see done because we were making verbal commitments to the community during our outreach meetings that we wanted to implement as many of those low-hanging fruit signage and striping and other operations focused improvements as we could, not just along the school frontages, but for whatever input we're getting through the public portal at the city level to see improvements, maybe a block off of a route in front of a school, as long as it's a school focused improvement. If we can build it within these first 2 years, we want to do it. So we do want to remind the community to give us their feedback if they haven't done so already. And then lastly, the other project that I wanted to highlight was that we are slated to continue to receive money in the annual bike and ped program. So for resurfacing program projects, we don't have to look to the resurfacing program to fund significant striping changes or green treatment elements with a project. We could, you know, combine projects like the annual street resurfacing and the annual bike program to implement meaningful projects so that we have better projects to deliver to the community. And so that is still slated to have 500,000 in the coming year. So in the next slides, I'm going to walk you through the projects themselves. So when I said 3.5 million for the street resurfacing program, that's really on the left, far left of this column here, the CIP number TS-01001, that 3.5 million is the total of TS-01001, 003, 004, and 008. Those are the projects. If you add all those up, it's roughly $3.45 million. That's how we're averaging up to 3.5. And so those numbers, those projects are slated just in the pavement program, and there's still additional funds for ADA improvements to do things like handicap ramps or repair of damaged sidewalk facilities. And then we still got more money set aside just for the resurfacing of alleyways around the city. Fremont Avenue, as a reminder, is a project that we will start construction on later this year. We've closed the bid program or the bidding of that project. It's slated for City Council award at the last meeting in June. I think if I remember correctly, that's June 22nd. And we've got the bids. We're just going through and working with the low bidder right now to kind of finalize and confirm their bids. And we're slated to a council award on June 22nd. I'm not going to go over every project. I'm just going to highlight for the ones that are the ones I'm more familiar with. One of the ones that we advocated for in 21-22 was the one I want to highlight here that's in yellow. TS0106, or the annual traffic sign replacement. The city has a really old GIS layer of all the existing signs in the city, and knowing that we're moving towards an implementation of a larger bicycle and pedestrian network with potential wayfinding signage, we wanted to actually inventory what we actually have in the field, so that as we're developing a new signage program for the bicycle pedestrian networks, we can align it with things that are out there, and that'll hopefully make the designs move a little faster. We are continuing to fund some of the other projects that don't really have a lot of activity unless people are asking for things, but like the annual neighborhood traffic management program that we've set aside money for to do traffic calming improvements on residential streets, that's there, but only spent if there's a project to work on, and as of right now there is not. We do miscellaneous transportation studies, and my contract's partially funded through 013, or the annual transportation hazards. That's continuing funded for next year. And we still have we have $100,000 in the annual collector traffic street program. So if part of implementation of the bicycle and pedestrian plan would potentially require some traffic calming improvements along a collector street, that is another program that we could use. So we don't have to look at projects in isolation. We can definitely combine where needed. I'm going to kind of keep going down some of these. University of Milverton, I do want to highlight out, because I know that is a project that was discussed in prior years. It is a project that we technically deferred funding for last fiscal year, for the year that we're currently in. And it looks like in the proposed budget that is actually slated for deferral for another year. I don't know the background history behind that recommendation. I think it just came down to priorities. That, just to make a quick note, was something that I called out to Jeff in the pedestrian network of the recommendation maps that you saw earlier. I noticed that the University of Milverton wasn't on his pedestrian network for improvements. And I said, hey, I think that's missing. That is a historical CIP. We should be calling it out. Anything that's a project in the CIP, we need to make sure it aligns with both the bicycle and the pedestrian network maps. And so it's not a project that would be seeing any advancement this coming year. But I did want to highlight it out, because I know there's been some residents in the community that have expressed interest in wanting to see that project move forward. But as of right now, that is not the case. Another project that I wanted to highlight out that's currently in the design phase is the Fremont Avenue pedestrian bridge rehabilitation. That's the bridge that's just to the east of the Loyola Corners Triangle. That project is currently in design, and will actually provide for the replacement of that bridge deck and some of the pedestrian hand railing along the bridge deck itself. That's in design. So they put aside more money in the coming year, knowing that we're going to have to put out to bid and build whatever we design in the current process. We do have money set aside for all of the repairs of the flashing beacons across downtown and other sorts of things that we've seen starting to fail. So we added more money to there to make sure we can actually build all and repair all of that gear. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the Safe Routes to School funding, you see here those $500,000 that we're slating over 2 years, with the $300,000 in the current year, or sorry, in the next fiscal year, started in July 1 in about a month, and the other $200,000 that's slated for projection in the coming year. And I would say at that point, hey, if we find that we need more money when we're going through the same process next year, we can ask yourselves, the City Council, to advocate for more funding if needed. But we're anticipating for all of those low-hanging type of fruits that should be enough. I did want to highlight one last project for you, and that's the very last one here. This is something that I actually recommended to the city staff. You know, we were very fortunate that with the 2016 Measure B sales tax, that we were the first project in the county to be funded through that program, and that is the widening improvements that are currently about to wrap up. They're almost done along San Antonio between El Monte and San Antonio Avenue. And we actually have a second project in that larger roads improvements program, and that's the widening of Foothill Expressway in the southern part of the city between Homestead Road down to the I-280 ramps. The reason we were able to be competitive in the project that's about to wrap up in the northern part of the city is because the city funded the design and worked with the VTA to get that design completion, so we had a shovel-ready project. A lot of the other cities we're seeing are starting to do the same thing for projects that they have. And so I suggested to the city, hey, we should really fund, or at least help the city majority fund the design of those widening improvements between Homestead and 280. And we slated funding for that in the 22-23 year, just to help balance out the program. But that is something that we're now looking to in the future to help us take advantage of some of that sales tax funding that's starting to roll in from the Measure B 2016 program. So with that, I think that's my last slide, and I'll be happy to answer questions as best as I can. But again, Jim is really the expert, and unfortunately he just wasn't here tonight, but I'm happy to answer whatever questions you do have that I can.
Very well. No yielding time this time. 5 questions or less. All right, Stacy, Suzanne, go ahead.
2 questions. One, the 300, well, okay, 3. The 300 million is really 300K, correct?
Yes.
I almost fell off my chair when I saw 300 million. I'm like, oh my gosh, we get to do it all. Second question, which is a follow-on. If in fact the total sum is 500K that we are predicting, how much of that, how many projects can we get done for that? We've seen 64 different improvements on the pedestrian map and untold counted on the bike network. Do we get to complete 50% of it, 100%? Any idea?
So as of right now, and again, I'm going to be very specific here, low-hanging fruit, signage and striping type improvements.
Okay.
Refreshing existing crosswalks, replacing existing signs, adding new crosswalks. At all of our schools, we should be able to build all of those low-hanging fruit, fruit improvements with $500,000. What that will not build, just to be clear, is if we're asking to potentially add new sidewalk gaps, close a gap, or we won't do things like that. We won't do curb ramps. Those will be things that have to be in a future capital year program, and those are going to be the kinds of things that when you see your priority ranking project list in June from Jeff for the CSMP, those things are going to be documented separately outside of that $500,000 expenditure program.
So just to clarify, anything that needs a shovel in the ground, that 500K doesn't cover. But if it's paint on existing ground, we're good to go. Pretty much. I mean, at a high level. Okay, great. Okay, I like to really simplify things down for myself. You had mentioned in our prior conversation about 50K for a bike counting equipment on certain roadways. Is that in the budget, or is that tucked in something else?
That's going to tuck in the annual bike ped, the 500,000 annual bike ped.
Thank you. No more questions.
Very well. Questions, more questions. Wow, nobody wants to spend $300 million. Okay. Suresh, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a follow-on question. So the Safe Routes to School E&E program budget, is that part of that as well, or is that separate?
No. The Safe Routes to School Education and Current program is actually funded out of the city's operating budget. Okay. So we're taking funds that are set as, that were originally thought were going to be used to hire a new staff person, and we use that to hire a contract person, in this case, Andrian, who you were just speaking to earlier.
Stacy?
3 questions. Jaime, first one, regarding the funding for the school route improvement maps, those are the striping and signing low-hanging fruit. That's right around the schools. What about, where's the funding for the hot spots, similar striping and signing improvements for those end-to-end routes? And I always give my favorite example here, which is like Arboretum and Deodora intersection, for example.
So I'm going to lump that into the $500,000. So I'll go a step into more detail. So if you recall in last month's presentation to you, when we were talking about the conceptual plan line drawings and the effort that we did around Los Altos High School, showing that hey, we're not really seeing a lot of interest from the neighborhoods to do proactive traffic calming measures, but for sure we're identifying 5 to 6 different locations we want to implement potential always stops as safety measures, to support that bicycle pedestrian commuting to school. We're going to fund that through the $500,000. If we're looking at things like Miramonte and Barry, which is another priority hotspot location that we look at as part of the CSMP, we're going to fund that out of the $500,000. If there's a request for some signage, you know, for pedestrian activity on an ancillary street that connects to a street along the frontage of a school, you know, that we're seeing as input from the public portal on our LosAltosCompleteStreets.com webpage, we're going to try and use the funding for as many of those as we can. And so I'm actually, if it's just signage and striping, we can do a lot. And so I'm hoping that we can find as many of them. I can't promise we're going to try and find 100% of them, but that's why I'm saying we got 300,000 the first year. We're going to bang out immediately the stuff at the school frontages, all the stuff that was in the hotspots with the CSMP, all the recommendations for the conceptual plan line drawings, you know, as much of the ancillary connections as we can, but whatever we can't, we're going to bang out in the second year. I would love to do them all, but to be honest with you, it's less about the money, it's more about the resources. Somebody has to design it. I have to design it. I just can't design that many in 1 year.
Okay, thank you. Two more very quick questions, actually, and much more minor in detail. The first one is the neighborhood traffic management program you're putting away. There's $50K a year that's getting approved and dedicated for this. If we don't spend that $50K, because we haven't had one of these proposals in years come to us, does that money come to, what happens to that money? Does it come back to us for a different streets project, or does it just go away from us? It just goes away from us.
It pretty much just goes away. That's exactly right. Yeah, you don't get to roll over the funding, unfortunately. So the CIP program is set there, and if you don't spend that money in that year for that program, you don't use it. And the city does that on purpose, where we set aside revenues for some projects, knowing that we may not fund them, and then, you know, if another project that is active needs more money, they know that they can rob from Peter to pay Paul, you know, but because there isn't a project, it doesn't matter anyway.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I don't want to say the rob from Peter to pay Paul, but if if that money is there and we're not using it, can we rob from ourselves and keep it in streets, or do we have no control over it?
No, that's not usually the way that works. Yeah, you can't do that because the projects have a scope of work, and so, you know, you have to use money for what is officially programmed for, and right. So that's the way it works.
Understood. The third question and my last one, just very briefly, there used to be a CIP program, if I remember correctly, for First Street Streetscape in downtown. And I don't think it was in the streets budget. I think it was maybe in planning's budget. Is that still in there? Where's that at? I realize you might not have the answers. And then similarly for El Camino Real Streetscape, I'm not sure if that one ever made it into the CIP or not, but you know,
I wish I could answer, Stacey. I really don't know the answer for both of those. I could definitely look into the CIP to see if the First Street Streetscape is there, but it isn't a project that's being led out of engineering or specifically transportation. So I don't know the answer, but I'm happy to research it, and I can send out an update, you know, as just a reference to
or when you bring our quarterly update back or something. Okay, thank you.
Great. Cindy.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on, I saw the First Streetscape design under the community development. It's like on page 21. Oh, but it's not budgeted. It has a carryover balance.
Yeah, so that tells me then if there's no money allocated, if they're not already working on it, that means they're probably not going to work on it. That's what that usually means. So that carryover usually means they did something and they stopped. Or if it's an active project, it's moving on, but they likely wouldn't be starting something new. That's what I understand.
And then in that same section, there's a line item for 999 Fremont, and there's nothing in that row, and all the fields are blank. So I think commissioners had a question from the last meeting around development there, and that probably answers our question for now. Right, and then so follow-up question to Stacey's question around robbing for ourselves. If I think that category that had the money allocated was neighborhood traffic calming, or I forget what exactly it was called. But is that the same purpose of that Milverton project, and are those appropriate to use, or is that separate buckets?
No. So the neighborhood traffic calming program, just to remind everybody what that technically is if the city receives a petition from residents to do traffic calming on the street, usually it's probably going to be speed humps like what we built on Arboleda. You know, if someone were to ask for that in their neighborhood and they go through the petition process, in the past, the city had made it really clear to residents that the city is willing to help make those improvements, but the city was asking residents to put some skin into the game as well by saying that the residents would be taxed for 50% of the cost, and this $50,000 would help pay for the other 50% of the cost. Now, we didn't do that for Arboleda because we felt that if we're going to make improvements on Collector Street, Cuesta at that time, that we couldn't do that without taking care of Arboleda ourselves, where we would have immediately seen some spillover traffic. And so that, in that case for Arboleda, we were able to do that without having to ask residents to help pay for those improvements. I know that you as a commission had said, hey, do we even want to bother asking people to pay for the 50%? That's really a policy decision that we haven't discussed as a commission. And you know, that might be something you want to look at later, but I would just ask, please not in the fiscal year 21-22, because we don't have the capacity. Or nor is there a community interest for a project, so it wouldn't make sense.
Okay. Great. Steve, Tom?
Yeah, it's a pretty simple question. The fiscal year that the city runs through, what are the months that it runs through? It's typically that's different for different, you know, organizations or whatever.
Sure. So a typical fiscal year in almost any city, it runs from July 1st through June 30. It's a fiscal year. And that aligns with when we get our tax distributions from the county and from the state. And so that's why it's usually July 1.
Okay. Because I know when I worked, the company I worked at, it was like September to October, or October to September. So, and it can be problems if the government's different too. So anyway, thank you.
Steve? Okay, I have a few questions. So actually, we'll start with a comment, or perhaps a comment to the commission, and that is, I want to encourage you not to think along the lines of robbing Peter to pay Paul, but more about thinking about where do you see priorities, and therefore we should make a recommendation to the city to fund it. Okay, we made that recommendation last year. We said to the city, you need to increase your resurfacing budget from 1.9 million to 3.5 million, and that's I think what we kind of positions we opted for taking, instead of like, here's a small pot of money, you know, how do I work with it? All right, so first question to Jaime and to perhaps all of us here. You know, semi-jokingly, I think we said $300 million, but if we had $300 million, what would you do with it? Seriously. When you say all of it, what would you, without going to specific projects, but if you had all the money, we somehow won the lottery, what would we do? What would we tell the city to go build first? Any quick thoughts?
I would agree with Jeff. I'd say San Antonio needs a little bit of love. I would say El Camino Real. I know those are the larger corridors that may not be ideal for long-term commuting for some of the school-age kids, but it's going to be where you probably see the biggest bang for the buck, not only from the standpoint of a better bicycle or pedestrian network, but it also introduces gateway opportunities for the community, beautification opportunities, sense of place creation, you know, and you would do the same thing along El Camino. I would also suggest you focus on the roadways that are contiguous across the city. I know we looked at Covington in that scope last year, and we have a little piece left kind of down at the southern end, but I would suggest that that's where we would probably want to look first. I would love to see some more work done on Foothill Expressway, yeah, but that has its own set of challenges.
Yeah, thank you, Jaime. I mean, this is not a rhetorical question, because that really sets the question, the question of priorities. If money is no object, where would you really want to invest your effort and time? And I think we need to think about it perhaps going forward. often we get too entangled with the smaller questions and miss the bigger question. All right, so let me move on to perhaps something more specific to the CIP. And that's a question to either you, Jaime, or to our council liaison, Council Member Weinberg. Does the city have a CFO right now on board? Do we have a CFO on board?
My knowledge is we still do not have a financial officer on board yet.
Okay, but that position is open, right? So I think at some point in time we would have one, or is that okay? So I would highly recommend that for the next CIP review, whenever that happens, we actually have a finance representative from the city participate, because I think I would hate us to sort of be more like, hey, we got a pot of money, what do we do with it? And then not understand the whole financial picture that influences what happens into the budgeting scheme.
Yeah.
And then the other question is, do we have a mechanism today to measure return on investment? I mean, I think when Jim came on board a while ago and he made this fabulous point to the city council and to the commission that the value of our streets were in excess of something like, what, $250 million, something like that. So it's an asset. And then we had to invest into that asset to keep its value and make it useful for the city. So then if I think of it as an asset, how do we measure the return on investment? I mean, I can think of the resurfacing, that's an easy one. You put some $3.5 million a year, and I would expect therefore the PCR to go up. Okay, that's an easy one to measure. And so we need to make sure that we measure that. I don't know how often we can measure, annually or biannually, whatever, some useful period of time. But then the other ones, I don't know, how do we measure the return on investment? All the other projects, I think, how do we put some metric that says, you know, we did this thing and we reduced, I don't know, perhaps unsafe events by X%. And how do we, what are the metrics? And this is really maybe not to you, Jaime, but I want to make sure that our council liaison sort of takes note of that. And I want Jim to sort of get the point of that. How do we measure the return on investments on this investment that we're putting into the assets?
Well, I do think a part of that is do we see the behavior change in the community, you know, and so within your roadway network, the bike pit books and transportation projects, are you just seeing more activity and use outside of a vehicle? That's an easy one to measure, you know, but we don't have the tools yet. We'll hopefully start to see those tools next fiscal year with the $50,000 we set aside for like ongoing data collection. We also do annual data collection that we started in 2019. We didn't do it in 2020 just because traffic was too low, but we actually just did it in May. And so we're going to have a 2021 data set, you know, that we'll probably count again in the spring of 2022. So we'll start to see how behavior changes happen in the projects where we've implemented improvements. I would love to see a air quality emission system, if that was possible, to see, hey, are we making an effect within our own community by implementing these projects? Those are typically sensors that you could add on as add-ons to like a counting system, but you know that it just takes a little bit of energy to figure out how to get that done. But those are some of the ways that I would say that you look outside of, you know, the financial return of investment, but the quality of impact and quality of life change that you're seeing within the community.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we somehow take that to the next level of rigor, Jim. I'm sorry, Jaime, and then have Jim think about it, because you know, at some point in time, we're going to have to be, as a commission, we're going to have to publish back to the community. What are those dollars doing for you? Right. So we can point to specific areas where, like Cuesta, you can say, look, we invested, you know, $500,000. And the result was a reduction of speeds by, you know, from Y, X to Y. But I think that's just one example of many other projects. I mean, you have a long list of projects in that Excel sheet, and we need to have some kind of mechanism that, you know, I would love to get to the point in the next, I don't think we can do it this year, but next year maybe, publish an annual report for the commission. And so we say, you know, here's what we're doing, here's what we've accomplished for the community. And we, you know, we've invested X million dollars, and we had those projects, and here's the return on investment for you, for the residents. And I don't know how feasible that is. Maybe it's just perhaps a bit of a pie in the sky at this point in time, but if we can even accomplish a fraction of that, that in itself is very powerful to sort of show the community and get support. Right now, I think the community looks at us and says, okay, I don't know what you guys do. And then only they get involved when the stop sign is going up outside of their house, or a green painting is going up inside of the driveway, and they kind of come and show up with pitches and forks. But I think we need to make sure that we kind of show them a bit more than when we invest so much money in the CIP projects, here's the benefit that you're getting, and here's how we quantify it. So if we can put some thought into that, I mean, great. This is, again, this is not a 6 months effort. This is sort of small incremental thing over a long duration of time. But if we can actually put more into it as we go along and begin to measure some of that return on investment, the PCI, air quality, whatever you said, and put some metrics behind it, that'd be great. Okay, awesome. Okay, Suzanne, go for it. I love the questions.
Okay, it's a comment, not a question, so I apologize, Chair. My comment is, this is fantastic. I remember when I started on this commission, we spent more on flowers than we did on bike infrastructure. And that condition persisted for 10 years. We spent more on flowers downtown than we spent on bike infrastructure.
You can't say that. You can't say that. You can't tell the people who are spending money on flowers that they're not doing a good job.
They're doing a fantastic job, and they're lovely. But now, you know, wow, boy, has the ship righted.
Thank you. Steve. You're muted, Steve.
Sorry about that. I'd like to follow up on Nadeem, a thought that you started on, which is kind of dovetailing the budget with the prioritization program. And Jaime, it's really a question for you, which is when we get to the point where we have our top priorities that we're going to talk about, and I don't know if it's 5 priorities or 4 priorities or 7 priorities, but whatever they are for big projects, are we going to get to the point where we can say, okay, given our budgeting process, here's what it's going to cost for each one of those projects within a certain ballpark, so that we can say, okay, if we recommended that we were going to do this one in 2022, it's going to cost X number of dollars, and a trade-off would be to do these 2 other ones perhaps as a higher priority. We'll be able to get the costs as well as the priority projects themselves aligned so that we can make some reasonable decisions based upon timing and what is the budget feasibility.
I'm sorry, so can you repeat the specific question?
Yes. When you present us with the priority projects, and I'll give you an example. Let's say El Camino is one, San Antonio is another. You can add what the 3rd and 4th one might be. Will you come back with us and say, these are the priorities, and this is the rough cost estimate that it would take to do each one of these, so that as we prioritize them, we can see whether there's budget feasibility there?
Got it. Yeah, thank you for repeating the question. So really quick, so yes, on the bicycle and pedestrian element, that you're going to see next month, you will see with that kind of high level planning cost estimates that Alta is putting together. So that was, if you recall, in your ranking criteria that you all developed in March, cost was one of the factors. It wasn't one of the higher ranked ones. We wanted a quality of project, but not to be so much influenced by cost. But you are going to see that number, and so that way, when we're seeing what the priorities are as part of this process, and we're looking to see what projects are we spending money on for the resurfacing program or for the 500,000 annual bike ped improvement programs, we can figure out, well, what can we build in the first year? What do we have to design in year 1? What can we actually build in year 1 versus what do we have to design in year 1 and build in year 2? So that 5-year horizon, I think that's going to be something that we'll be able to do, not today as part of the current CIP process, but once we're getting towards the point where we have a draft bike ped plan, and then we know what the 5-year CIP looks like because we're going through that process now, we can try and project out what we can build, and you all will influence that in your recommendations and your priority ranking next month.
And then then it would be reasonable as a next step to then go to the council and say, this is the trade-off that we might be able to make within the total budget of the complete streets side, but we may also ask them for some additional monies if there's a high enough priority which they believe would trade off other things against. Is that right?
I would say that could be part of definitely your recommendations to the city council with future budget programs. And just as a reminder, you can miss that opportunity this year just because we didn't have a finance officer at the city and it was really rushed to pull this current CIP together. But next year, the plan has always been get this to you really early so that you have a chance to make the change before the city council sees the recommendations. That is the plan.
Okay, thank you.
Cindy.
Hi. I think you're hearing some of the themes that we repeat in our previous meetings, which is more around, making sure that we're clear on how things get prioritized and how we're able to measure the impact later. So just bookmarking those two thoughts because we're always going to be asking about those and wanting to make progress and figure out a plan for that. So related to that, and maybe more foundational, is can you talk to how does a project make it on this list? Because like some of these buckets or projects are kind of umbrella things where we stuff other projects under, and then other ones seem like for some reason or other we've pulled it out as a separate line item. Can you talk a little bit about how that process happens, or how does it get identified as a separate explicit line item? You're on mute.
I love how RingCentral and Zoom are really specific. When I know you're muted and you're talking, you get that visual cue too. So when you said it, the computer told me. But yes, I was gonna say that I'll use the example of University of Milverton as a really good example of how a project gets pulled out as an individual versus maybe lumped in under something larger in a larger CIP. So University of Milverton was a recommended project in your 2015 pedestrian plan as a sidewalk gap closure element. And so I don't know how the ranking priority pushed that one up above others. Usually it's someone has a louder voice and is asking for it. That's usually the influence historically, but in this specific case, that was broken out as a project that was a recommendation, as I understand, from the 2015 pedestrian element. And so it was funded for a reason as a priority with several other projects that were already built. Resources, of course, influence what can get done at the time. And we, with University of Milverton specifically, if you recall, we identified that even though we saw challenges in the design with right-of-way, that we could make some mitigation measure improvements right away. And we put in always stop at University of Milverton just last year. And so that's the thing that influences it usually is if it's identified as a specific project within a different document. And the CSNP will likely identify a few hundred individual projects based off my preliminary discussions with Jeff. And then larger projects like the 500,000 annual bike bed improvements, we're just going to use that number to chop off of that 300 project list. And we may never fund them as individual projects because it just wouldn't make sense to create a CIP for one small one. And for a good example, that might be maybe we want to do a citywide bike route program where we do put in sharrows or route signs on a corridor. And rather than break up a small project on one corridor, it may just make sense to take a larger approach. And so that's based off of discussions with the commission. It's based off of discussions internally with the city staff. And then we usually will recommend an implementation plan to a body like yourselves, the city council.
Great, thank you for that. And then, I don't know, I guess I'm mixing comments and questions, but to the chair's question around around measurement and the goal and how we're measuring a return on investment, I did notice that there's, outside of the things that are relevant to Complete Streets Commission, there's some other CIP items that are under the same budget. So I just wonder, I guess, to our council member, does the city have a CIP measurement mechanism, or is there a goal for the overall program? And then if not, or whether or not there is, should we have a separate sub ROI calculation for the complete streets related CIP items? Just posing that question out there.
I think that's a Jim question, and Jim just isn't here today, but
Yeah.
I don't know if Jonathan had a thought on that. I can't answer that.
Let's Jaime, if you guys should take those questions to Jim, and at least for him to think through them. And perhaps along those lines, what can we learn from other cities, adjacent bigger cities like Mountain View and Palo Alto, who probably have much bigger budgets than we do? How do they measure their ROIs? Or sub ROIs, whatever, how do you measure the effectiveness of that investment? Okay, so let me see if we have any members of the public who wish to have any comments on this topic. It's a very thin attendance today, but anyone in the public who wishes to speak on item number 4? Going once, going twice. All right, let's bring it back to the commission for final comments. Let's be brief, please. If there are any comments. Okay, I don't see any comments. So with that, we close item number 4. And good luck with the execution to the city staff. There's a lot of work. You double the budget, so it's hopefully double the pleasure, double the fun, and double the work, right?
Thank you, guys.
Yeah. Okay, so with that, let's go to item number 5, staff report.
Thank you. So I have just a few projects that I want to give you some updates on, projects that are actively in construction. The first one I want to touch base on is the El Monte Sidewalk Gap Closure Project. That's the project that is bounded between Clark Avenue on the west and Almond Avenue on the east. That project, if you haven't had a chance to drive out there or ride out there recently, we did re-slurry or microsurface that street. That originally wasn't an element of that project, but I was the person that pushed for that because we originally didn't have it in the money to do, and after we widened the roadway, for the additional bike ped space on the north side of Almond, and we ground off all the old roadway markings, it just did not look good. And we didn't want that to be a demonstration project of a complete streets project in the city of Los Altos that we could point to other communities within the city. And so we paused the projects probably as a result of that, taking an extra 6 weeks or so while we did a bid for a microsurface contractor and had them build the job. But that microsurface work is now complete. The striping along El Monte should go in the week of June 7th in that time frame. And shortly after that, we'll be putting in all of the vertical short raised rubber island elements within the bike buffer spaces, the bike ped buffer spaces. And so that project will be complete definitely by the end of June. But we're after a short pause, we are now seeing momentum again. That will also include the same contractor doing the striping works, also going to be doing the striping work on Almond Avenue to put in the two-way cycle track between the high school, Gordon Avenue to San Antonio. But we may push that striping back because if you recall, that also has a associated traffic signal modification at Almond and San Antonio. But we just found out, I actually just found out while this meeting was going on, that the contractor doing the traffic signal mod isn't expecting some of the gear to come in for the traffic signal mod until late June. It's just, everyone's just so busy and manufacturing shortages on the traffic signal side. And so we may delay the Almond Avenue implementation of the striping for a month because we don't want to put the cycle track in without the signal modifications, the company's signal modifications being there. So I just literally found that out while this meeting was going on. And the county expressway widening job that I mentioned earlier as part of the earlier item, the restriping on El Monte, my understanding is in. We were able to negotiate with the county to help us. We put in a buffered bicycle lane on El Monte coming from east to west to east as you're approaching Covington, that block between Foothill Expressway and Covington Giffen, we did work with the county to put in a buffered bike lane for us, because that's a corridor route to the Covington School, and we felt it was appropriate to do so. We had the roadway space, so why not take advantage of it? We also worked with the county to make some more school-focused improvements as part of the project along the widening. We had them put in some high-visibility crosswalks for us, for the crosswalks coming from the west side of Foothill Expressway. And those improvements are now all in. And so we wanted to we guys send a thank you to the county for doing that for us, but that's also completed as well. And that was another micro surface. And they also put in a bike box for us at the, as you coming west to east at Covington Road. And that's going to accompany the bike box that we're going to build on the week of June 7th, coming out of Covington, going towards downtown. So a lot of little movement happening. We are, just as a quick note, we are tentatively scheduling ourselves to have 2 community meetings in June. One's going to be likely in the St. Joseph area. We did receive a petition from the neighborhood out there about interest in parking impacts and some parking preservation opportunities if possible. So we're gonna schedule a meeting, probably going to be around the 3rd week of June. And so we'll reach out to the people that submitted that petition and let you all, make sure you're all aware if you're interested in participating in that. And we're also looking to have a focused commercial area meeting along El Camino Real. If you recall, we asked we asked you for your thoughts in April about how to move forward with advancing the opportunity to take advantage of Caltrans's active resurfacing job on El Camino next summer to put bike lanes in for us. We've had meetings with Caltrans. They want to make sure that we can submit to them our policy approved bike lane concepts along with the environmental documents. We just hired an environmental person to help us with that process as well. But we want to have that focused outreach meeting in June so we can come back to you by July with the environmental documents, the community feedback, so you can consider forwarding a recommendation to City Council over the summer for approving those bike lanes in El Camino Real. So a lot of movement going to be happening, and that's the end of my report.
Great. Thank you, Jaime. Any questions to Jaime? All right. Very well. Good. We're making great progress tonight. I should be like that every time. Suresh, go ahead.
I just had a quick question. You're talking about possibly pushing back the cycle track on Almond, painting, and then the related signal modifications. Would that be done by the school opening, or you don't expect that?
Yes. As of right now, I was just told by the signal contractor that they're just not going to get the signal equipment until the end of June, which means that we would just finish everything in July.
Okay, good. So with that, let's go to commissioners' reports and comments. You get to have 5 comments or questions. Wow, what happened now? Nobody wants to speak anymore.
So I can give an update.
All right, go ahead, Stacy.
VTA BPAC in the quarterly TSCN meeting. So VTA BPAC we voted on the bicycle superhighway county plan. I think through Los Altos, they just have El Camino Real and Foothill Expressway that landed in that plan. The overall county plan was like $500 million. We talked with Lola from VTA when she was here about how much Foothill Expressway costs. So the Foothill Expressway and Juniper Serra into Palo Alto was about 22 million, with about 20 million being on Foothill Expressway. So probably, as we expected, more than she told us. So I think it's on our tentative agenda to have the county come and talk with us about their active transportation plan and Foothill Expressway. I'd highly recommend that because I think county staff have things in their minds as well too. that we should just have that one-on-one conversation with them. And I think that's my big updates. I can send out the specific timeline that the county presented at the TSCN meeting for the active transportation plan.
Great, thank you. Any further comments?
I would just make one quick comment, and that since the meeting I attended 2 meetings ago, where there was a lot of public outcry about the height of speed tables and speed bumps, I've been personally experimenting with my new Toyota RAV4 Prime, going up and down all the streets and over the speed bumps. And I think if you behave yourself and follow the signage and drive at the appropriate speeds, they work absolutely terrifically without any damage, noise, or discomfort. If you hit them going 2.5 times the speed limit, then you get punished for that. And I think that is a great design feature. And that was all I was going to say.
Thank you, Steve. I love the quality assessment, QC by the commission. That's awesome. Other comments? Okay, very well. And we'll go to the last item, which is future agenda items. Not to sort of say we're not busy, but I don't want to just put stuff in there, but I know that every so often we do get some bright ideas, so I want to make sure we capture them.
Chair, I just want to make a quick note for you. I am expecting you're going to have a lot of discussion at your June meeting around the priority ranking of the projects. I do understand we have one potential development project coming your way in June. That's just what I was told by the planning department. And so I would probably suggest you may want to limit your budget, your agenda topics for next month. I know we typically will discuss that separately as an agenda planning committee, but I just did want to know, it may make sense in this case for June, keep yourselves really light, because that one item alone could take you all night. And
Wow, you call that light?
Have a lot of discussion on.
Keep us busy all night, you call that light? Okay. And are we expecting any development projects our way in the next meeting?
There is one coming up in June. I think there was another one in July. My understanding, I saw an email for 2 development projects. And if there's not another one in June, again, I might suggest we don't do anything in June except for your priority ranking.
Got it. When do we expect, by the way, sorry, Cindy, just give me a moment. When do we expect to see the big project that's on this step?
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
The one on Distel Circle that's sort of being the big development project, several hundred units are being proposed. Are we expecting that this year, or is that going to be further out in the future?
I don't know, but I can maybe try and find an answer for you guys and report back to you next month. I don't know the answer.
Okay, Cindy.
Yeah, just comment on the topic of the monthly agendas. Just circling back to, I think we had, the original work plan that we submitted with our letter. We didn't make not final, but we didn't make updates to it to adjust for, whatever the staff capacity and whatnot would be. So I just wanted to bring that up and see if, I know we disbanded the subcommittee already, but I don't know, Jaime, if you've been able to get input from Jim on that.
The new transportation manager just started on Monday.
Oh.
She's got a lot. She starts on June 1st, I should say. So I know she's got a lot of stuff that she needs to get ramped up on. Luckily, you're going to be getting Marisa Lee. She was involved with the Complete Streets Master Plan on a lot of the design work you saw through the concept plan. She's really good on that. And she's pretty sharp in general. So I'm not seeing a lot of time to ramp up on her side. But I think until she starts, we really don't know. Kathy Kim, who a lot of you also saw at these meetings, her last day was today. And so the city we gained Marisa, but we also lost Kathy. And so we are recruiting for Kathy's position as well. And so this summer is we're imagining we're going to be pretty stressed because we got a lot of pavement jobs coming up, and we lost Kathy, who really handled that effort for us. And so, no, we haven't had a specific discussion with Jim on how we're going to adjust those capacities. We are looking, though, to take advantage of some of our on-call contracts to help people help us. I'm looking to help also, maybe bring someone on to help out if I need to. But I think we're going to be working through those things once Marisa gets on board.
Yeah, thanks. I forgot about Marisa. But I think just to set our expectations, we should just assume that we should probably cut all those. Like we had some pretty packed months through the summer, and we should probably cut that in half.
Well, the one thing though is the one thing that I don't want to let slip is we are kicking off tomorrow our consultant contract with Hexagon. They're going to be working on those checklists for VMT and level of service for development type projects. That's kicking off for us tomorrow. We're not anticipating that's going to take a large amount of time for the consultant to do. So I don't want to pack it onto the June agenda because I really want to see you guys focus on the priority ranking. So if we need to maybe schedule another study session with just to go over that item so we can keep it moving, maybe we schedule something in early July and then keep some of those other items moving forward. And that was something that we slated, I think, originally for June, or actually it was actually May, but because the contract wasn't executed fast enough because of the finance issues on their staffing side, we weren't even able to get it to June. And so I wouldn't want to see it slip for a long time because that's really important, I think, as development activities start to take place. So we'll work those things out with the chair, and if we have to add in a study session here or there, if you guys all have capacity, it helps us move the projects along.
And if I may remind whoever wants to participate in putting that checklist together for the development projects, let's get that done soon, please.
So that's on me. And if anybody else wants to kind of be a reviewer or give input or work with me, I'm happy to.
No. Nobody should work with you. We don't want to get into those issues. So you please submit your checklist to Jaime, and somebody else can then provide input to Jaime.
Yeah, and I think Jaime also had ideas last time on, maybe engaging Marisa with this and getting some input from the staff side before we bring it back to the commission. So, but it's on me.
Great. Let's see if we can get it done before the June 30 meeting. So we do a quick test on the new developer.
Yeah, you just make a quick note. Like, I'm not going anywhere. Marisa's going to be taking over. I really want to see Marisa be successful in this role. I really want to give her that opportunity to kind of take some of the projects from the very beginning and not be implicitly by me. And so that specific project that you were just talking about, Stacey, I really wanted her to handle it because it's a great project to do for her. And so I'll still be around. You might see me start to fade over the next few months as a face that really should be Marisa, because she is your transportation manager. But please know I'm here. I'm vested in the city. I want to see all these projects that we've been working on together. I want to see them get built, and I want to make sure that we deliver you guys some great projects. I'll still be here, but Marisa will likely over time become your face.
So does that mean, Jaime, that we're not going to see you on June 30? Is that right?
Oh no, I'll be here June 30. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Cool. All right. Great. So with that, if there are no more suggestions for agenda items, I'm going to actually close and adjourn this meeting. Thank you all. It's 8:11 p.m. Good night.
Good night.